Okay, welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. A lot is happening here on the program, so we want to break down everything for you, joining us on a great day. First up, there's a pretrial hearing scheduled today for Robert Durst, the infamous real estate heir, who's going on trial for the murder of his friend Susan Berman. It's alleged that Durst killed Berman to keep her quiet about his alleged involvement in the murder of his wife Kathy back in 1982. Durst is a name that should sound pretty familiar, as he became the subject of the HBO documentary The Jinx, in which he arguably confessed to his crimes over a hot mic in the show's finale. That itself has become a subject of legal controversy. Now, we're not sure exactly what the issues are going to be discussed today in that hearing, and while we won't be able to be live, we are planning on having footage from the hearing later on in the day, and we're going to update you this afternoon on what's been happening nonetheless. Next up, at 12:30 p.m., we're going to be live with opening statements in the Arizona trial of Ramon Bueno. Bueno is charged with attempted murder and various other counts in connection with the 2014 shooting of Trooper James Casey. The state alleges that Casey pulled over Bueno and other individuals because their car that they were driving had heavily tinted windows, which is a crime in Arizona. Now, during the stop, it's alleged the defendant, who was seated in the back seat, took out a .357 caliber revolver and shot Trooper Casey in the face. The miracle of the story? Casey survived and returned to active duty the following year. Now, this also may sound very familiar to many of you, as Casey and his team were featured on A&E's Live PD, hosted by our very own Dan Abrams. Now, Casey is planning on testifying in this trial, and that will no doubt be an incredible moment to watch. Right now, we're planning on jumping live any second into day 8 of the Mark Sievers trial. He's the man accused of plotting the heinous murder of his wife, Dr. Teresa Sievers. It's alleged that he hired his friend Curtis Wright Jr. to do the actual killing, but then he recruited a man named Jimmy Ray Rogers. In a trial that we covered here on the network, Rogers was convicted of second-degree murder. Wright himself took a plea deal, potentially 25 years in prison for second-degree murder in exchange for testifying against Rogers and Sievers. The state called Wright their star witness earlier on in this trial, and he testified about his friendship with the defendant, how they plotted to carry out the hit, and how he and Rogers brutally bludgeoned Sievers to death with hammers. Beginning this morning, the defense will officially start their case. Now, they may call back Wright Jr. to the stand, and what's more, Sievers himself may choose to testify. So as we wait to jump live, we're going to start with some testimony that you might have missed. Yesterday was a pretty interesting day. One of the witnesses we saw was Taylor Showmaker, another name that might sound familiar to you because Taylor Showmaker was the former girlfriend of Jimmy Ray Rogers. Now, she testified in his own trial for the state. Let's hear what she had to say this time around.
I'm going to start with May of 2015. Or around that time frame. First, let me ask you this. Were Curtis Wainwright and Jimmy Ray Rogers friends?
Yes, they were.
And can you tell us what they did as friends? What kind of things they did together?
Barbecue, drank beer, hung out.
And did there come a time when Curtis Wainwright was getting married?
Yes.
And were you and Jimmy Ray Rogers invited to the festivities before and the wedding?
Yes.
And did you meet Mark Sievers during that weekend of the wedding of Wayne Wright to Angie Wright?
Yes.
And did you meet him the day of the wedding, or had you met him before?
Before.
And where did you meet him before?
At Curtis and Angie's trailer.
And were there a number of people at the trailer at his
Yes.
residence?
Mhm.
And did you see whether or not there came a time when Mr. Wright and Mr. Sievers kind of went aside and had a conversation outside of everybody else?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury about that?
It was the night before the wedding. They had went off into Angie and Wayne's bedroom and had a private conversation.
Was there anyone else in there with them?
No.
July 18th. Were you at home that day when two Detectives Down and Levitt, came and knocked on your door?
For the first time?
Yes, for the
Yes.
first time. And when they initially knocked on your door, was Mr. Rogers home?
No.
Did he get home a little while shortly thereafter?
Yes.
Now, after he came home and the detectives left, I want to talk about what Mr. Rogers did and what Mr. Rogers did. So the detectives have left, and what did Mr. Rogers say or do?
I don't think he spoke to him very long. I think he pretty much shut him down. And then after they left a business card on the counter, and he grabbed that card and got rid of it. I never seen it again.
Did he also take anything to the dumpster to throw out?
Yes.
What did he take to the dumpster to throw out?
The shoes.
Gotta tell you, always uncomfortable when she says Mr. Rogers. I mean, this is just a bad connotation, but having said that, we have to break down everything that she said. And joining me are two very special guests who are going to break down everything with me this morning, attorneys Jessica Ramirez and Nina Ovrutsky. Great to have you both here. Jessica, I want to start with you. How damaging was her testimony to Sievers? We can clearly see why she was very damaging to Rogers, but how much so to Sievers?
Well, I think she's corroborating everything that the prosecution is putting forth. So she's very damaging to the defense because she's proving every element that the prosecution has to prove. And the culprit told her what happened, right? I took a hammer and I killed her. And I think, again, she's just corroborating all the elements of the crime.
But Nina, the thing that we're missing, what we didn't really get, yeah, she called him a pervert. Yeah, she said, you know what, I saw Sievers and Curtis Wright having this secret conversation. I didn't hear her, and I don't think that she was permitted to say this. Rogers told me that he was hired by Wright Jr., who was hired by Mark Sievers. She didn't make that connection to Mark Sievers. Maybe because it was hearsay, there was an objection, it was limited on how much she could say, but really, she didn't connect Sievers that much. I mean, is that one way of looking at it? What do you think?
I would agree with both perspectives. I think that a lot of her testimony definitely helps corroborate the fact that Rogers, without a doubt, was involved, and there are some underlying notes of Sievers' involvement. I think perhaps she's afraid to say something directly about Sievers. Like you mentioned, she might have not been permitted to. It might have been hearsay. Other various rules of criminal law and evidence that prohibit her from saying and mentioning things about Seaver, but yes, she avoids directly implicating him here.
And I'm wondering if the jury feels they might be missing something here. How impactful was she? Well, let's play a little bit more of Taylor Showmaker from yesterday.
He went to his work down in Doe Run, and he got his phone out of a locker and put it in a drinking fountain and then stomped it and smashed it.
Did it end up being in pieces?
Yes.
Do you remember how many pieces?
I do not.
And how did you all get to his work? How did that happen that you went with him to his work?
He was just like, get in the car, we gotta go, and I did, and we went down to his work, and then everything started like unraveling.
When he said, "Get in the car, we're going," how did you feel?
I was nervous.
So, do you remember what happened after you left Doe Run with the phone in pieces? Where did you all go next, or what did you do?
Drove back towards our home, and he had me throw it out the window piece by piece.
The phone?
Yes.
Was there anything else that during that car ride he asked you to throw out?
Not that I remember.
Did there come a time when you got back to your home with him?
Mm-hmm.
Did you end up taking another car ride with him to throw out something else?
He told me we were going to my mom's, I think it was, and he grabbed other things, and on the way to my mom's, he had me throw out more things.
And was one of those things a pair of overalls or coveralls?
Yes.
And do you remember where you threw them out?
On Highway 47.
Did there come a time in 2016 when you called Detective Downs in late January or early February to see if there was any financial assistance?
I did.
And why did you call him at that time? Were you in financial trouble?
Yes.
Why were you in financial trouble at that time?
Because my car was gone, my house was gone, and I had no way to do anything or work.
And what did Detective Downs say when you called him?
That he'll see what he can do.
And did you, at the end of February, was Detective Downs able to do something?
Yes.
And what was it that he was able to do?
He was able to help me with my rent.
And how much money do you receive? How much money did you receive?
I don't know. I know that I got $400 a month.
So has it been $400 each month?
Except for the very first check, it was first and last.
All right, the implication there, of course, is that she's getting paid to help the government. She's getting paid to testify. Does that make her a less credible witness in your eyes, Jessica?
I don't think so. I mean, of course, the defense is going to have to poke holes, and I like that the prosecution just kind of dealt with it right away. It's something that does happen, especially if you have an indigent victim. And, you know, she is a victim, I think, as well. She's a victim of being in this relationship. So I don't think it makes her less credible. I think, you know, we all have to have common sense, and that does play a part, but I think that she was very credible. I thought that she was scared to tell the story, and I in my eyes, I don't think that makes her less credible.
Nina, what do you think? Because what the prosecution tried to do under redirect later on, and maybe we'll get to it, is where they said, you know, you didn't have to come forward. Why are you coming forward today? She says it's because it's the right thing to do. And, you know, you could argue her life hasn't been easier since she came forward and testified against Rogers and now Sievers. Do you buy that argument? Or is it the jury going to be saying, how convenient for her to say she just is coming forward now because it's the right thing to do?
Absolutely. I want to believe that she's a credible witness, but anytime there's some sort of incentive, you definitely question the motives of the individual.
Well, all right. Well, we have more to play from Taylor Showmaker, more to talk about with what happened yesterday, and we're eagerly anticipating the defense's case today, so stay tuned. We'll be right back right after this. And welcome back to Long Crime, everybody. We're waiting to jump live right now into the Mark Sievers trial. There apparently is a deposition that is going on, and that's why there's a delay in the courtroom. But the defense is planning on starting their case today. It's going to be interesting to see. Now, one of the things that we've been seeing throughout the whole course of this trial is what is the defense's strategy? You recall in their opening statement, they were trying to pinpoint it all on Curtis Wright Jr., that he was the one who decided to kill Teresa Sievers. But what we didn't really hear is why he would have done this. And maybe that's what they're going to articulate today when they begin their case. But we've been studying the defense's strategy when they've cross-examined the state witnesses. Did they cross-examine Curtis Wright Jr. as effectively as they could? Were they saving some things for him to be called again in their case? Maybe. But one of the things that we saw yesterday was when they had the opportunity to cross-examine Taylor Showmaker, Jimmy Rogers' former girlfriend. Now listen very carefully. You be the judge. Did they make any good points? Let's see.
Talked about going to the get-together at Mr. Wright's residence. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Said there were a lot of people there. Do you recall that?
Yes, there was.
And the fact is, you had been drinking that evening. Is that correct?
Yes.
To the point that you were drunk.
Later that evening, yes.
Okay. How many people would you say were there?
Guesstimate of like 10 to 15.
Okay. And was everyone inside Mr. Wright's residence, or a combination of inside and outside?
A little bit of a combination.
Okay. So you said that you saw Mr. Wright and Mr. Sievers go off together. Is that correct?
Yes.
Were you inside or outside?
I was inside.
Okay. And was there anything about Mr. Sievers that was special to you, or made you look his way?
I mean, perverty, but
What's that?
kind of a pervert, but I didn't really look his way because of it.
Do you recall when you said that you looked inside the cooler? Do you recall that?
Yes.
And you said you saw a ball peen hammer. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I do remember that.
And just so we're all clear, a ball peen hammer isn't the hammer that has the two ends protruding. It has the kind of the ball on the other side of the striking surface. Is that correct?
Both sides had like a ball on them.
Okay. Okay. So that's what you recall seeing in the cooler.
Yes.
Do you recall if you remember Mr. Rogers bringing that with him when he left for Florida?
I do not. I don't remember seeing him pack any kind of bags.
You said that you saw Mr. Rogers throw out some black shoes. Recall
Yes.
that?
Yes.
And that would have been on June 18th. Is that right? Or July 18th. I'm sorry, July 18th.
I'm unsure of the exact date.
Where did he throw those shoes out?
In the dumpster in the trailer park where we lived.
How far away from your residence was that dumpster?
Maybe 100 feet.
Okay. So it didn't take him long to do that?
No.
Jessica, let me start with you. Did the defense make good points there? Remember, their client is Mark Sievers, and I believe it was under cross-examination where, because they were questioning her about Mark Sievers, she says, oh, I thought he was a pervert. And yeah, trying to show what this meeting was about, was she drunk? But really, did they pick their battle right here? Did they pick these questions appropriately? How much did they win?
Maybe not that question. Usually when you're cross-examining, the examiner is trying to tell their story, and really you want to elicit yes and no answers from the witness. And that was not a question which would have elicited a yes or no answer. So I'm sure that was a big whoops in their part. And then regarding the points, in regards to her being at this party and that she was drinking and there was a lot of people, so maybe could she have really seen what she saw? Where there was a lot of people. Where was her attention? Then she was drinking. Maybe she was under the influence and seeing things that really weren't there. So I think that's what I got from this cross-examination. Again, I'm sure they didn't like that response, but they also didn't, they shouldn't have asked that question.
Sometimes less is more. You don't have to ask
Absolutely.
questions. And Nina, we've had different guests on here who have criticized the defense's questioning throughout this case. The way they question this witness, the way they question Curtis Wright Jr., and that these questions really don't seem to be going to their point. How is it helping their client's case? Do you think that they're not asking every question that they could be asking because they're waiting to present their case? They're waiting to present their side of the story. We know that they're going to call back Curtis Wright Jr., and as I said at the top of the program, it's entirely possible Mark Sievers may testify. So you think they're reserving something?
I think they're treading lightly, and I think anytime you are cross-examining a witness, you want to be careful with what you say because you don't want to elicit testimony that's damaging to your case, especially in such a high-profile murder case. So I think that they perhaps might be saving something for later, but they are also very careful because, again, they don't want her to testify to something that will ultimately make or break Mr. Sievers' position.
And look, they did question her about a number of different aspects of her testimony. I want to play a little bit more of this cross-examination of a really key witness. Take a look.
I asked you in this deposition, I said, I asked you a little bit about any agreement you have with the state or law enforcement. Is it your understanding that you have an agreement to testify against Jimmy Rogers? Do you recall your answer? You said, well, yes, I have an
Your
agreement
Honor,
to testify.
I object.
Sustained.
Okay.
You need to ask her if she remembers.
Do you
and then
recall,
she can answer.
do you recall saying that?
I do not.
Okay. I'm going to give you this deposition. We're going to take a look to refresh your recollection.
I see it, I just still don't remember.
Okay. So this doesn't refresh your recollection?
No.
It doesn't refresh your recollection of having said that or having an agreement with law enforcement?
Haven't said that.
Okay. Do you recall having an agreement with law enforcement?
Somewhat.
Somewhat?
I mean, it wasn't like, and I don't know how to explain it. I don't remember them asking to agree to do it. I just remember going forward and telling them that I wanted to help with it.
Okay. Further, you agreed to testify against Mr. Sievers, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. At that time, you had no job, is that correct?
No, I didn't.
You had no money coming in, is that correct?
I mean, Jimmy worked. We had his money coming in, but
Okay. Speaking of Jimmy, you told us about the conversation that you had in bed that night. That would have been in on June 18th, is that correct?
I'm unsure of the exact date, but somewhere in there.
Would have been after the first time police came to see you?
Yeah.
Okay. And you had that conversation with Mr. Rogers, is that correct?
Yes.
And after that, you continued to co-reside with Mr. Rogers, is that correct?
No, not really.
What do you mean, not really?
I started staying with my mom.
You continue to have correspondence with Mr. Rogers when he was in jail, correct?
Yes.
You never changed your cell phone number, right?
No.
Okay. You never changed your email, correct?
No.
And in fact, since this began, you've gotten remarried, is that correct?
Yes.
And you didn't even change your last name. You're still Taylor Showmaker, correct?
My name has changed now.
When did you change your name?
A few weeks ago.
Okay, so that would have been in between Mr. Rogers' trial and today then?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, trying to strike at her credibility or motivations. Did that backfire?
I don't think so. I think, again, they're doing the best job that working with what they have. They talked about that she did agree to testify. So basically they're saying, you're not here because you want to be here and because you're trying to do the right thing. Don't believe the hype. You're here because you agreed with the prosecution, and she did get rid of evidence. We don't know what side deals she had with the prosecution. Again, talking about you have no money, so you're not only do you have an agreement, so you have to testify, you're also getting money. In regards to the last question about her name change, and I guess what they're trying, corresponding with her ex-husband, what they're trying to prove is, this guy did such an awful, horrible thing, and you're still corresponding with him. I mean, do we believe somebody like you? So they did the best.
It hurts the idea that she's coming forward to just because it's the right thing to do, but then again, she is coming forward. She came forward twice. Nina, what does the defense have to do when they present their case today? They're going to call several witnesses. Again, I'll say it once, I'll say it again. They believe they're going to be calling Curtis Wright Jr. Mark Sievers may testify. In your opinion, after everything you've seen from the prosecution's case, what does the defense need to do?
Well, the defense needs to really work on building off of the state's case, all of the cross-examination that they did, and really tying together their defense. It's their last shot.
See, my opinion, they have to present an alternative theory about why Curtis Wright Jr. would have done this, and maybe it's exploring the relationship between Wright Jr. and Mark Sievers. Maybe it's exploring a relationship between Curtis Wright Jr. and Teresa Sievers. I need a better understanding of what happened here, because by all accounts, it's going to be very difficult to just say that, oh, you know, he just did this because he had nothing better to do, or he just did this because of X, Y, and Z. And Jessica, I feel that's the key here, is the idea of establishing, you know, will they go into the idea of a sexual relationship at all between these two men?
You know, who knows what they're going to do? I'm still trying to find out the motive for, you know, for Wright to have done this. I still don't know. So we'll see. It's going to be very interesting.
It has to be articulated. I think that's what the defense should do, but who knows? We're going to see what happens. We're waiting to go live. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll have more. Welcome back, everybody. We're waiting to go live in the Mark Sievers trial. The defense will begin their case, but right now we're dissecting everything that happened yesterday. And we heard some incredible testimony from people that knew Dr. Teresa Sievers and Mark Sievers very well. One of those people, Dr. Bethany Mitchell. Now, she is going to provide testimony, we're going to play it for you right now, where she talks about Mark Sievers' response, his reaction, his behavior after his wife was killed. This is very interesting to hear. Take a look.
At some point after that, did you become aware that an arrest had been made in the case involving her death?
Yes.
And who was it that you learned had been arrested?
I learned that Wayne Wright had been arrested.
Do you know Wayne Wright?
I had met him before, but I wouldn't say I knew him really.
Did you know whether or not he had any kind of relationship with the Sievers family?
I knew that he was a lifelong friend of Mark's. That's, in that regard, that's how I knew him.
You and Mr. Wright didn't have any kind of a friendship or relationship?
No, we did not.
So when you learned that Mr. Wright had been arrested, did you have a chance to discuss that with Mr. Sievers?
Yes, I did.
And how did he react when you tell me how the discussion with Mr. Sievers started.
As I recall it, Mark called me when Wayne was arrested and was panicked, I would say, worried that he was going to be arrested next, and seemed panicked about the fact that Wayne had been arrested. And it was a surprise to me learning that Wayne had been arrested. So I was asking Mark, what's going on? Why would Wayne be arrested? Your friend from Missouri. How is it that he could be involved in Teresa's death? And he was emphatic that Wayne had nothing to do with this, and that there's no way Wayne would be involved, and that this was clearly the police fabricating a case against Mark and Wayne.
Did he seem at all upset with Mr. Wright about being arrested for killing Dr. Sievers?
No, actually, and that was the strange thing to me, that he was not upset by it in that regard, not angry, not curious, even remotely curious that it could be possible, but definitely no anger whatsoever, even at if he possibly was going to be related to the death of Teresa. And that didn't change every time we talked. So, that seems strange to me.
Did you have an opportunity to ask Mr. Sievers why Mr. Wright would have killed Dr. Sievers? His best friend would have killed his wife.
Yes, indirectly, in that he would say, that he loved Teresa and was nothing but grateful for her for things she had done over the years to help him.
And when you say, let's clarify the pronoun. When you say he loved her, who's the he?
Curtis.
Okay.
Curtis Wright.
So Mr. Sievers told you that Mr. Wright loved Dr. Sievers.
Yes.
Okay, and that she had done things to help him.
Right, and for that he would be nothing but grateful and have no ill will toward Teresa.
All right. You find that odd? Out of all the comments that he can make, out of everything he says, he's not angry so much at Mr. Wright. He's angry at police and that he thinks he might become implicated. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it is very strange. He's not angry, he's not upset that his best friend has been implicated. And I think that you can infer many things. one of which, I think a normal person that's grieving, your wife or your significant other has been killed and your best friend is implicated, you're not going to be so quick to defend your best friend. I mean, you're going to be angry, you're going to be confused. These are all common sense things that the jury, of course, and we all have to look at. So again, it doesn't look well for him.
How's the defense going to spin this, Nina? Because look, like Jessica said, the argument is, hey, these guys originally were going to protect each other. We go back to Curtis Wright Jr.'s testimony. He said he lied to police initially in order to protect himself, Rogers, Severs. Now you could argue that Severs is trying to protect Wright, and that they're trying to cast doubt on the state's, the law enforcement coming after them. But how is the defense going to address that? Because it looks really bad.
Sure, I think it's a classic situation of a murder for hire gone wrong, and now, they're pointing fingers at each other. I think it was also interesting enough how he said that Wright loved Severs, and it would be interesting to see the defense today try and play a little bit upon that, and maybe that Wright had feelings or relationship with Dr. Severs, who knows, and that perhaps, that was maybe his potential motive.
They might also do the classic defense technique. You can't judge a person's emotions, what happens in this kind of situation. Everybody reacts to things differently. Again, he has been accused, Mark Severs, of shedding fake tears, that he appears to be crying, but there's no actual tears that come down. We heard a witness yesterday who felt that he was engaging in bad acting by banging his fists on the ground and being on his knees. Maybe we'll get to that in a minute. Let's play a little bit more of Dr. Bethany Mitchell.
When you say he would not entertain the notion because he was innocent, the person who wasn't entertaining the notion was Mr. Severs?
Correct.
And the person who was believed to be innocent, was that Mr. Wright?
Correct.
Okay. Now, at some point, did you also become aware that there had also been a second suspect arrested in the death of Dr. Severs?
Yes, I did.
Jimmy Rogers.
Yes.
And did you get to have a discussion also with Mr. Severs about Jimmy Rogers?
Yes, I did.
How did that discussion start?
I asked Mark, who is this Jimmy Rogers, and what do you know about him, and why is he now arrested in addition to Wayne? And he said he did not know him, he'd never heard of him. He had no idea who it was.
Now, when he said he did not know Jimmy Rogers and had never heard of him, did that cause you any concern?
Yes, I was concerned about that because there were pictures and different pieces of information on the internet and on Facebook and things like that showing Mark standing with Jimmy at Wayne's wedding. So I believe one of them, they had their arm around each other or something. So I knew at that moment when he answered me that way that he was not being truthful with me.
Did he ever express any anger to you during your discussions about Mr. Wright?
Never. And never showed any anger toward Wayne or any kind of anything close to anger around it. It was mostly concern for his well-being and that fact that he had been inappropriately arrested.
Did Mr. Severs express anger towards law enforcement?
Yes, he had a lot of anger toward law enforcement that he expressed to me regularly.
So he was more angry with law enforcement than he was with the person who was accused of killing his wife?
Correct.
Lieutenant, the witness.
Anger's an interesting thing in this case because we heard a little bit there. The different kind of anger is who we heard from a different witness, Ms. Contreras, who was actually, again, another important witness for this, the state. And she described these angry episodes from Mark Severs. He, threw himself, if I remember correctly, in some sort of store and was ranting and raving, according to her. The more they can play up this anger, the more it seems to suggest this is a man who could ultimately do this, but then why didn't he do it himself? I guess that's the question. If he was so angry, he's such a violent person, he's angry, why didn't he do it himself?
Well, because he's a coward, and it's again classic murder for hire, and he didn't want to get his hands dirty, and he thought that he could, as he's used his wife, never worked, lived off of her. He used his friend, who he knew was a bipolar. He had trouble with the law. He knew that this guy would do this. So I think that there's really no explanation for it, except that he didn't want to get his hands dirty, and he knew which victim, this time, not that he's a victim, but who he could use. And again, it's just very inappropriate. The anger wasn't authentic. He didn't seem authentic. Then he wasn't angry. And that's just not an appropriate, that's not how you behave when your significant other has passed away and then so violently.
Right.
So it just doesn't add up.
I got to imagine it's pretty frustrating to be a defendant in any case and having people talk about you, testify against you, prosecution jumping down your throat, which is why we asked the million-dollar question, will a defendant get on the stand and tell his or her side of the story? Does Mark Sievers, now I know it's his right to not testify, but given everything that's been thrown at him, doesn't he have to testify? Doesn't he have to provide his side of the story? Do you think he's going to testify?
I do not think that he's going to testify because I think that it exposes him to a lot of risk.
The case is pretty strong. What more could he lose?
Right, but the state will ultimately try and tear him up on the stand. You can guess what they're going to ask, but at the end of the day, you don't know what they're going to ask. So it exposes him to even more risk than being on trial for murder.
Jessica, your thoughts here, because again, I hear it, I know. Look, if you take a probability or a statistic from law and crime, how many defendants have testified, it working out in their favor, it doesn't work out too well for the defendants,
No,
all right?
it
I mean, they
doesn't.
are mostly found guilty. However, we've seen other situations where someone comes on the stand, gives their side of the story, and the jury believes it. You tell me.
Well, I think it's a strategic one made by the attorneys, whether they're going to have their client testify, and then at the end of the day, then your client, it's his decision to testify. And again, you have to be a likable defendant. You have to build empathy. You have to be able to clearly state your position. And I don't know if he's going to be a likable defendant. There's so many people that Wright has already testified against. Rogers has been found guilty. There's so many corroborating witnesses that have said these awful things about him. I just don't know if he's going to be likable. So I don't think he's going to testify. I don't think his attorneys are going to want him to testify, but that's going to be ultimately
his decision.
His decision.
Right. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a break. We're waiting to jump live. I tell you what, we actually have a shot of the jury's empty chairs. We're waiting for them to be called back in and the defense to begin their case. Stay tuned. We'll be right back right after this.
What happens inside courtrooms? You won't believe it until you see it for yourself. Take a front row seat inside real courtrooms and hear firsthand from those who are there.
Grant me 5 minutes in a locked room with this demon.
I'm Dan Abrams, and this is Court Cam.
Court Cam. New series premieres Thursday, December 5th at 9 on A&E.
And welcome back, everybody. We're waiting to jump live into the Mark Sievers trial. I am waiting for the jury to be called in because the defense is going to officially start their case. And they have a lot to do. And we believe that they are going to call Curtis Wright Jr. back to the stand. What are they going to question him about? What are they going to ask him? What did they leave out when they had an opportunity to cross-examine him as a state witness? We'll see. And one of the things we're also talking about is whether or not the defendant himself, Mark Sievers, will take the stand. Because what we've seen from the state, besides a very strong case against Rogers and Wright Jr., is also a strong case against Sievers, particularly from the statements of family and friends of Teresa Sievers. Now, we're going to go back to yesterday when one of her friends, Danielle Baradelli, testified, and this part is very illuminating about the motivation, or maybe lack of motivation, for Mark Sievers to kill his wife. Take a look.
I did, and I was taken aback because, you know, I thought our first words would be about the void that Teresa was going to leave as a mother and as a wife and as a friend, and or like the who or the why, the how. But instead, we had a conversation about who was going to take care of the children in the event that he could not. And then we talked about the life insurance policy.
Did Mr. Sievers tell you at that point that he had some kind of terminal illness or something that would prevent him from being able to care for his daughters?
No.
But he was concerned he wouldn't be around.
Yes, and I was very confused by that and told him so.
Then you said the very next topic was life insurance. Did the life insurance come up in reference to the girls, or did it come up for some other reason?
No, so after he talked about somebody taking care of the girls, he literally dropped to his knees at the foot of the bed and he started talking about money and the fact that he was very concerned about how he was going to make money to raise the girls financially. And he said that he didn't have a job, he hadn't worked for anyone in years. He thought maybe he could go back to nursing at some point and get recertified, but that would be a lot of time away from the girls. And he was looking at me like for the answer, because I had the answer. I knew what the answer was. And I said to him at that time, Mark, when you asked me to be guardian of the girls, you told me that there was a very large life insurance policy. You told me that the girls would be very well taken care of. And he immediately had a look of relief on his face, and he put his head in his hands and he said, "Oh, I totally forgot." I did. He told me about it. He told me about the life insurance policy and that it was a very large life insurance policy.
And in the late night hours, early morning hours, so between July 30th and July 1st of 2015, he didn't appear to remember that?
No, but he remembered that I was to be guardian of the girls.
Okay, let's talk about that. Is this just a man who's panicked about his life now that his wife is dead? Or is this somebody who's trying to manipulate the situation in the same way that arguably he manipulated that phone call, that voicemail that he left Teresa Sievers' best friend to go check on her in the house? Do you believe him? Or I mean, how do you, if this is true, if he really had this conversation, how do you view it?
Well, the fact that he did not remember having a conversation about an insurance policy is just, it's unbelievable.
Too convenient.
I mean,
too
come
convenient.
on. That's something that you do not forget. You're discussing with someone about the guardianship of your children and how are they going to be able to be taken care of. That you do not forget. So again, I don't buy it. In regards to his, again, inappropriate behavior, what this witness that is inferring, you know, he very robotic. He wanted to talk about the kids and not really the pain. that could go either way. You know, the defense can spin it around and say some people grieve differently. But again, the fact that he didn't remember that conversation is just unbelievable.
They could spin it and say he just, he was panicked. He didn't remember such an important thing. However, Nina, here's the issue that I have with this, though. With him saying, I'm wondering if the defense is going to spin it this way, because one of the things I recall they said in their opening statement was, Teresa Severs was worth more alive than dead. Do you think they're going to exploit that and say, okay, he really was panicked. He really didn't know who was going to take care of the girls. He really didn't know where the money was going to come from. And maybe this life insurance policy, yeah, maybe, but really, she was the breadwinner. Is the defense going to exploit that? Can they exploit that?
I think there's only so many times that the defense can argue that he was in a state of panic to try and cover up his true motives and the fact that he potentially did murder his wife.
Yeah, but the idea also of that she was worth more alive than dead.
I think that for him, that might not have been the case, right? If you really wanted her dead, then there was a reason to him that she wasn't worth more alive than dead.
And Jessica, we saw other witnesses yesterday overheard arguing, and there were people who didn't like him. You think the prosecution has painted a good picture? Let me rephrase. Has the prosecution painted a really bad picture of Mark Severs at this point as someone who maybe had the will to do this, but also the motivation to do it as well, that there were signs, there were clues leading up to it?
I think so. Again, he's the only one here with a motive. I still don't know what Wright's motive was. Maybe we'll find out when the defense puts him up in the stand. So I think that they have done a really good job of painting him to be this monster. And again, we're going back to she was worth more alive, but that's only if they would have stayed together.
Right.
If they would have gotten divorced, which is what we heard, again, this is his lifeline. He's never worked. He's lived off of his wife. So, I hope that the prosecution will go into that a little bit more, but if not, I think that they have really good evidence and they have direct evidence. They have someone saying, hey, I took part in it. I did this because I was told to.
And couple that with the neighbor who testified yesterday that she would see them fighting, and she testified that she heard Teresa say, I'm tired of this, I'm leaving. That's huge. That is huge for the prosecution. But again, prosecution rested their case. Now it's up to the defense to paint their picture, their narrative of what ultimately happened. And they're going to need to do something because the prosecution presented a very strong case. We're going to take a break, keeping a careful eye on the courtroom feed. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. We have interesting development that's happening right now. So we are about to jump live any second into the Mark Sievers trial. Again, this is the man who is accused of plotting the murder of his wife, Dr. Teresa Sievers, that he hired his best friend, Curtis Wright Jr., to do the killing, but Wright Jr. then enlisted an associate of his named Jimmy Ray Rogers, and the two of them showed up and hammered this woman to death. It's a horrific crime, but now it's a determination what happens to the alleged mastermind, the ringleader. Now, the prosecution officially rested their case. The defense is about to begin theirs. And we started off the day with an interesting development. A juror just told the judge that based upon this juror's observations, that another juror might not be paying attention to what's happening in the courtroom during testimony. And I got to tell you, I'm not that surprised, considering this might happen in a lot of trials. Not also surprised given that the last several days was a lot of heavy technical witnesses with DNA, and then there were cell phone experts, and yes, it got a lot. It was very tough to hear. However, the idea that a juror kind of would be a tattletale and tell on this other juror, well, now the judge has to figure this out with the attorneys. I want to get some perspective on this. You don't hear this very often. Back with me, of course, are attorneys Jessica Ramirez and Nina Ovrutsky. Jessica, have you ever seen this before? A juror calling out another juror?
No, I have not, but I'm not surprised because jurors take their job very seriously, and there's always a leader in the jury pack. That always happens. So I'm surprised that they've told on each other, but I'm not surprised this happened. Usually they will figure it out in between themselves. And that DNA and that expert testimony, that technical testimony is boring. And jurors, they do look glassy eyed sometimes. So it's going to be very interesting, and especially for the defense. I mean, what arguments are they going to put up?
Well, Nina, what are you supposed to do as the judge? Look, you have to imagine during the course of a trial, jurors are not going to pay attention 100% of the time, especially when you have this kind of technical testimony. However, they're supposed to listen as much as they possibly can, and they're really supposed to listen to everything. What is a judge going to do right here?
I think in a situation where it's that obvious that you're not paying attention, because yes, we're all human and there are moments that we are not devoting 100% of our time to something, but when it's this obvious, I think the judge should strongly consider removing that juror and putting in an alternative.
There was a situation earlier on in the case that I don't know if this is the same juror, but there was a situation where a juror was nodding off. Look, that's a problem. That's a realistic, practical problem for both sides. But right now, it's only been the prosecution, right? I mean, the defense hasn't put on their case. The defense is cross-examining their witnesses. So would you, if you're the prosecution, be a little worried right now that, maybe some jurors are not paying attention to my case in chief?
I would be worried. Both sides, I would be worried. And again, the technical testimony is a bit boring, but I think what the judge is going to do, he's going to try to remedy the situation and probably pull that juror aside and go through the questions. And if the juror does say, listen, I was awake, I was paying attention, I'm not sure why this person is saying this, I think that might be enough to remedy and to put that juror back on the stand.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think
the jury pool.
Right, no, I think the judge is speaking to the jury. Let's hear what's going on right now.
Yes, sir, and I appreciate you doing that. All right? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, we didn't really get a sense of what was said, but by all accounts, it looks like this trial will continue, and it looks like it will continue with the same jury. So now if you're sitting as the prosecution, Nina, and you're like, okay, I got to reiterate my case once again during a closing argument. You can't get that technical, but you have to think about, well, what parts did this jury miss? So how do you sum up a case in a way that really grasps the jury's attention one final time?
Well, the prosecution definitely will have to focus on the main points that they initially wanted to make, and then the stronger points that they elicited through various testimony and evidence that was presented. I think that sometimes your conclusion changes throughout the course of the case in what you want to say and what you want to convey to the jury one final time.
Okay, well, I think the judge is questioning this jury or this juror. Let's go back live and hear what's happening.
You've had to adjust your hearing aid, and I hear it reverberating occasionally. I just need to make sure that You've been able to hear everything that's been discussed during the trial.
Yes, sir, I can hear. Sometimes it's not as clear as I would like, but I'm getting everything.
Okay, you haven't missed anything?
No, sir.
Is there anything I can do to help you with that issue at all? Because we have
No, sir, Your Honor.
we have additional hearing devices in the courthouse as well, if you think that might help.
Yes, I am aware of that type of thing, but I'm okay.
Okay, is there anything else we can do for you to make sure that you're good, or you'll let us know if you're not?
Yes, sir, I will let you know, sir.
Okay. State?
Nothing from the state.
Defense?
Again, just, sir, is there anything that we can do to?
Yes, I've got everything that's been said.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, I appreciate it.
Have a nice day, Your Honor.
Well, we'll see you in a minute.
Now, not to judge, but our understanding is that this jury is comprised primarily, or maybe a lot of them are retirees, and maybe that's a situation with the hearing aid. But it looks like they're taking it seriously and they really want to be a part of it.
Yeah, I think so. Jurors usually do. And, I think that both attorneys now get to argue their case again during closing. So it can be remedied. And that is when you argue your case,
right,
point by point, element by element. So I think, listen, that jury room is going to be very interesting, the tension in that jury room now after this has happened. But what the judge did was very proper, and they both still have closing, so they can hammer out anything that they thought they missed.
That's why the closings are so important. They might have remind you of something you might have missed. It might help explain something that didn't seem so clear at the point. Okay, so now the defense is going to begin their case. First, Nina, are you surprised that the defense lost their motion for judgment of acquittal? Basically, this legal concept that after the prosecution's case, we're going to file a motion, say everything you've seen, there's not even enough to take this to the jury, it should be thrown out. They lost that. Now they have to put on their case. Were you surprised that they lost that?
I was not surprised that they lost that. It's definitely a standard motion that is made, and I think it's one that's very tough to overcome. There are too many witnesses here casting a shadow of doubt in terms of whether he committed this crime or not.
Right.
And ultimately, they can't move to just acquit him.
Because there seems to be such strong evidence. Now, Jessica, who do you think the first witness is going to be for the defense? Who would you call out as the first witness? They have a bunch. They could call out Severs. I mean, not Severs. If he wants to testify, they could have Wright Jr. We're about to see. Who would you call out first?
I probably would call Wright. Just going through the psychology books, the people hear the first and the last thing that you'd say, so you want to go hard.
So they hear the first witness and the last witness.
Usually you want to go strong, and that's your first witness, and you want the jurors, especially since some of them are falling asleep, or one of them is falling asleep, you want to go hard.
And Nina, what do you think? Would you call out if you were the defense?
I agree with Jessica. I think that Wright is the key witness here, and it's important to start with him, and then based on his testimony, go from there.
Like we said, we need some explanation for why Wright Jr. would have done this alone. Why would he have recruited Jimmy Ray Rogers to kill Teresa Severs? There was no connection between Rogers and Teresa Severs. So now it's a question of why would this man who took a plea deal, why would he be the orchestrator for all this? And why would he implicate his friend Mark Severs, who is supposedly his best friend? And that's the question. That's what we're waiting to see. And maybe that's who they're going to be calling out right now. We see there's some direction towards possibly the first witness coming to the stand, and we're waiting to see who this is. How does a jury, Jessica, how does a jury think about a defense's case? So do they take a reset? Do they have everything in their mind about what the prosecution just did? I mean, we're about to start in the defense's case. Where's their mind right now?
Well, usually it depends, right? I mean, most of the time, if they see somebody on the defense table, the jurors, they think the person's already guilty, even though that's not the standard, that's not our legal system. And then that's why an opening statement is so important. That's why your opening statement should lay out your argument and the facts and the defense to your case, because the jurors are going to sit there throughout the whole state prosecution's witnesses, and they should have something in their mind thinking, wait a minute, I do remember the opening, I do remember this is the defense, maybe I should look at it sideways.
Well, now they're going to be having to look at a new witness. This is the first witness for the defense. Let's see where they're going.
Extraction report on Mr. Severs' cell phone.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And did you have occasion to review a document provided to you from the defense prior to coming in today?
Yes, sir.
Can I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, sir. Exhibit number?
This is going to be exhibit number 2. Do you recognize that document, sir?
Yes, sir.
What is it?
It's a filtered report where it's just only communications between Wainwright and Mark Sievers.
Okay. And is that a fair and accurate copy of the report of communications between Mark Sievers and Curtis Wainwright?
Yes, sir.
When does the report begin? What date?
I'm sorry. January 1st, 2015?
And when does it end?
July 1st, 2015.
And who prepared that report?
I did.
Okay. Did you make, other than isolating the conversation solely between Mr. Wright and Mr. Sievers, did you make any other additions or omissions to that document?
No, sir.
Okay. Your Honor, I'd like to move what has been previously marked as Defense Exhibit 2 into evidence as Defense 2.
No objection.
We'll show it admitted.
And handing it to the clerk. Tender the witness, Your Honor.
State,
No questions, Your Honor.
is this witness to be released or retained?
Mr. Stott may be released.
State? Agreed?
Released, Your Honor. Yes.
Thank you, sir. You're free to go. Next witness?
Next witness, Your Honor, is going to be Detective Levitt.
All right, so their first witness, rather short, somebody who actually testified for the prosecution in the beginning of their case. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll see who they're calling up next. Five counts, over 80 accusers, a defendant claiming everything was consensual. The case that's been 2 years in the making. This is the Harvey Weinstein trial. On January 6th, the world will be watching what happens to the man who's been accused of being one of the most prolific sexual predators of women in entertainment. And Law and Crime is going to be there every step of the way, from in-depth analysis and commentary to live reporting from the courthouse. This is Law and Crime. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're waiting to jump live right now in the back in the Mark Sievers trial. And Jessica, we only saw one witness so far, very short witness, just Kevin Stout. This is somebody who testified earlier about cell phone data for the prosecution. Only one or two questions. What was that about, you think?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I mean, they didn't poke any holes. I didn't, get any information as to why they would have pinned the records or the cell phones incorrectly, which is what I thought they were calling him to the stand. So I'm not really sure why they called him in the first place.
Nina, we think that as of right now, the defense is going to mostly call state witnesses on their case for recall. We do believe that there is an estate attorney that is going to be called. This estate attorney was deposed this morning. This is going to be the first new witness that we see in this trial. I imagine that's to suggest that perhaps Teresa Sievers was worth more alive than dead. Do you think that's where they might go with that?
They might, look into the assets of her individually, them together, perhaps explore his motives or try to show, like you mentioned, that she was worth more alive than dead and he didn't have a motive to kill her.
Jessica, does that usually work in these kinds of cases when you have a spouse accused of either killing or being responsible for the death of their spouse? You look at their estate and you say, well, wait a second, really, there's no sense for him or her to get rid of their significant other.
Well, I mean, it does and it doesn't. I mean, the defense is going to have to put that defense up. They're going to have, that has to be their defense. What else? We'll see. I think it's going to be very difficult. I think there's so many witnesses against him. There's so many circumstantial evidence against him. There's direct evidence against him. So I don't think any of this is going to work for him.
Talking about what's against him, as we wait to jump back live, and it appears that they might be calling a new witness. So let's just take a second and see what the situation is. They are waiting to get a new witness on the stand. Nina, another sidebar, that has to be probably in regards to the lineup of witnesses, the next witnesses that's oh, okay, so we have a new witness on the stand. Let's jump live and see what's happening.
I wanted to ask you, because we didn't have a chance really to talk about this. Initially, you suspected that Angela Wright had some involvement in this case. Is that correct?
Objection. Leading.
Your Honor, this is a
Overruled.
Initially, you suspected that Angela Wright had some involvement in this case. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what formed the basis for that suspicion?
Prior experience working cases.
Okay. You came to uncover that Miss Wright had a prepaid phone that was activated. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that phone was activated on June 28th of 2019 and June 29th of 2019. Is that correct?
No.
No?
Say the date again.
June 28th, June 28th of 2015, and June 29th of 2015.
That sounds correct, but I can't tell you exactly because I don't remember seeing the actual report. If you had the report, I could look at it and confirm it for you.
Okay. Did you ever speak to Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Okay. And did you ever ask her about this prepaid phone?
When we became aware of the prepaid phone, that was after I had already spoken to her.
Okay.
So I never had another occasion to which I spoke to her about that prepaid phone.
How did you determine that this particular phone was a prepaid phone?
I don't recall the exact details on that part of the investigation. Like I explained to you on prior testimony as a supervisor, I oversaw a lot of the details, but not minute things.
Well, let me ask you this. Were you able to first ascertain whether she had a regular contract or kind of we'll call it an assigned phone number?
Yes.
Okay. And this phone number was different than the phone that she used to contact or correspond with Mr. Wright on June 28th and June 29th of 2015. Is that correct?
I don't recall exactly what number was used, but I do know that when I first spoke to her during my first interview, that she had a phone.
When you first spoke to Mr. Wright, you talked to us earlier about themes. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And you said that life insurance was one theme, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you said that marital turmoil was another theme, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. You also indicated that Teresa, I believe your statement was she's going to take the show on the road and up and move away. Do you recall saying that?
It sounds like something I said, yes.
Do you know where she was going to move to?
No.
Do you know when she was going to move?
No.
Did it appear that any financial transactions had taken place that would wind down a business or set up a new lease or mortgage in a different place?
Not that I was aware of, no.
Okay. And at the time, were you aware of Mr. Seaver's occupation?
Yes.
He was the office manager of the medical practice, is that correct?
Yes.
He had no other job, is that right?
Other than assisting with raising his 2 children. That's the only 2 jobs I was aware of.
Okay. So is it fair to say then that there was really nothing anchoring Mr. Seavers then to Southwest Florida?
I don't agree with that.
Okay. So you think if Dr. Seavers moved to a different state, that Mr. Seavers would likely stay here?
Objection calls for speculation on the part of the witness.
Overruled. Can you ask that again, please?
Do you believe that if Dr. Seavers were to move to another state, that Mr. Seavers would stay here?
No, I think he would go with her.
Okay. Thank you. Nothing further.
State.
Lieutenant, you and Lieutenant Downs and the other members of the Lee County Sheriff's Office conducted a full investigation of Angie Wright, isn't that correct?
Yes.
And during your investigation, you found that Angie Wright never came to Florida, right?
Yes.
Never had any reason to see Dr. Seavers dead?
Correct.
Never had any reason whatsoever to be involved in this homicide, isn't that correct?
Correct.
If Angie Wright had been involved in this homicide, had been a co-conspirator, you would have had her arrested too, isn't that correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
You would have had her arrested too, isn't that correct?
Yes.
And she wasn't arrested because she wasn't involved, right?
Correct.
And during that discussion, during your previous testimony, when you talked about Miss Wright being a blip, she was talking to potential witnesses in Missouri, isn't that correct?
Yes.
Told them one thing and tried to get them to say something different, isn't that correct?
Yes.
In fact, it was the witnesses that told you about this, isn't that correct?
Yes.
And you wanted her to stop.
Yes.
And did she, in fact, stop trying to walk the witnesses back on their statements?
Yes, she did.
She didn't interfere in your investigation, right?
Correct.
She didn't interfere with your arrest of Curtis Wainwright, isn't that correct?
That is correct.
And she hasn't interfered with any more witnesses, isn't that correct?
Correct.
This other phone that Miss Wright had never came to Florida, did it?
Not to my knowledge, no.
And regarding Mr. Seavers still owned a condo in Missouri, isn't that correct?
Yes.
An escape plan.
Possibly.
Thank you.
So if I understand your testimony, sir, Ms. Wright was tampering with witnesses, is that correct?
That's one way to look at it.
And Mr. Hunter asked you about the condo as an escape plan. Is that something, to your knowledge, that he recently purchased?
No.
And in fact, that's a condo that he co-owned with Dr. Teresa Seavers, correct?
I can't remember if her name was also on the mortgage or not.
Nothing further.
State. Two questions. Mrs. Wright's discussions with those witnesses happened in Missouri. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
And if there was a crime of tampering with a witness, it would have been in Missouri, right?
Objection calls for legal conclusion.
Sustained.
And the apartment in Missouri still had Mr. Seaver's personal property in it. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Is this witness to be released or retained?
Release, Your Honor.
State.
It's free to go now.
Thank you, sir. You're free to go.
Thank you.
Okay, so much of that discussion was based upon Curtis Wainwright Jr.'s wife. Where was the defense going with this witness?
Well, I think that what they're trying to prove, number one, is this officer only suspected Wright. That was the first question. You only suspected Wright, correct? And then, in regards to his wife, who has a telephone and a burner phone? I mean, again, inferences. What do we infer from that? Why would anybody in their right mind have a burner phone? She must have been part of this plan. Again, then the state went, well, the phone was never in Florida, so she wasn't part of the plan. Then she was tampering with the witnesses. So I think, again, reasonable doubt, reasonable doubt, reasonable doubt.
But even if she was involved, Nina, it doesn't mean that Mark Sievers wasn't involved.
Absolutely, but they're doing anything that they can at this point, the defense, like you had mentioned earlier, to prove an alternate theory, and implicating Mrs. Wright builds more and more upon the fact that Mr. Wright had the motive.
Here's an interesting thing to remember. This woman, Angie Wright, was on the prosecution's witness list, but she wasn't called as a witness. So that's something interesting to think about. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll be live. All right, welcome back, everybody. We're live once again in the Mark Sievers trial. My understanding is the jury has been called out. They're dealing with some exhibits, which is what explains why some of the witnesses that are being called by the defense, it's rather short testimony. They're just trying to introduce exhibits that they might not have been permitted to introduce during the state's case. Is that very common, Jessica?
It is very common, and this all has to be done outside of the juror because the judge doesn't know if it can come in, if it's going to be prejudicial. So it's very common and sometimes very tedious work that happens, and juries are called in, they're brought out, they're called back in. So it's very common.
And I would imagine, Nina, they're getting this stuff out of the way to get to the real meat, the real heart of their witnesses. Again, we believe they're going to call back Curtis Wright Jr. and maybe Mark Sievers will choose to testify. So are they trying to get rid of this as the first thing?
Yeah, there are often procedural issues, evidentiary issues that need to be taken care of, exhibits marked in prior to proceeding with the main testimonies.
Let's see if we can jump back in and hear what's going on. I think they're still going over some exhibits. Let's see where this is.
Turn on the speakers, make sure the speakers are on.
Do you know, how did we come to find these items today? This is Detective Mike Downs, Lee County Sheriff's Office, reference agent case number 15-268513. Time now is currently 6:38 p.m. on Tuesday, August 25th, 2015. Following is going to be the recovery of overalls with the assistance of Miss Taylor Shoemaker. She led us this position. We're currently on the Highway 47 East in Washington County. All right, Ms. Shoemaker, can you just walk me over to where you've identified the overalls that we're looking for today?
Yeah.
Just please don't touch them or pick them up, but if you can point to them, is that the item in question?
Yeah.
Okay, and how do you know, how did we come to find these items today?
Is that your out the window?
When did you throw them out the window? About? Was it after we came to talk to you?
Yes.
Okay, and what was the reason for throwing these out the window?
I didn't know at the time.
Okay, but you came to learn why, right?
Yes.
Okay, and why is that?
Because he murdered somebody.
Who's he?
Jimmy Rogers.
Okay, and you know Jimmy Rogers personally, obviously, right? You're his girlfriend? Okay, and did he instruct you to throw these out of the window?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Could you go ahead and conclude at 6:39 p.m.?
Okay, so my understanding, that was Taylor Shoemaker, Jimmy Ray Rogers' former girlfriend, who testified yesterday. The state is arguing that that video is not admissible, but they do stipulate that is her in the video. They had to do that so that she could be released from the subpoena yesterday. What do you think about that video?
Now, I'm not really quite sure because she's testified to all of this. She's testified to what's in the video and that she about the overalls. So I'm not
disposing of the evidence.
Of the evidence. So I don't know what the point is and why they want to show it or why the defense is arguing. I really don't understand because again, she's testified to all of this.
Why would the state not want that in?
Perhaps because the state sees this as, again, trying to move away from Mr. Sievers, focusing on Mr. Rogers, focusing on Mr. Wright, and ultimately the state's goal here is to have a verdict convicting Mr. Sievers.
Well, let's go back live and hear the state questioning this witness about the video.
Yes, ma'am.
Your argument, this is not done in real time, therefore it is not a spontaneous statement, any of the answers to questions, because they've already had the conversations and they're already now recording what actually occurred in the past. So it is not an exception to hearsay. It does not contradict the testimony of Lieutenant Downs, who said that they went there, that she found them. It does not contradict the testimony of Taylor Showmaker that was received in this courtroom. So it is not impeachment, and therefore there is no exception to introducing a video that is a replay, so to speak, of something that occurred before the video was made, let alone these statements that are in it that are a response to questions. This is pure hearsay.
Again, Your Honor, this is not hearsay. These are spontaneous statements. These are verbal acts. And the video actually shows additional evidence, such as the surrounding. If Your Honor recalls that this was thrown out by a bridge where there was water. There was none of that contained on this video. Accordingly, Your Honor, this video, as short as it is, has additional evidentiary value, and that it further explains the testimony of Ms. Showmaker. And whether it was a reenactment or not a reenactment, Your Honor, it's still helpful to the jury to show that this is how this particular evidence was collected in this case, and this is the environment from which it was collected.
Your Honor, I think that you view this not as a reenactment, but as a recorded interview. The state introduced photographs, 37A through D, which showed the same topography, and which counsel is speaking of. And so in terms of the video providing additional information, it does not. But again, this is an interview that's being recorded. It is not admissible, and there is no other value to this recording because the photographs introduced before provide the same information as we see on the video in terms of topography. And there is nothing that is said in this video that is admissible.
Okay. How many witnesses do you have after Lieutenant Downs?
Your Honor, I'm going to call Ms. Van Wass. I'm going to call Mr. Curtis Wayne Wright. I plan to then call Dr. Petritis. Unfortunately, Myra Simmons is not available until tomorrow. And additionally, Your Honor, I would like to call Monica Lyons. I anticipate calling Ms. Lyons this afternoon. I think her testimony is going to be a little more lengthy than we can get into in a morning.
Are there any other issues with evidence that you're going to try to introduce that you and the state have gone over and there's objections to?
Your Honor, I anticipate with this witness, well, I don't anticipate, I'm going to enter the plea agreement waiver of rights. Mr. Downs was present for this this plea agreement waiver of rights. Other than that, for Ms. Van Wass, I'm going to enter what is I believe it's Exhibit 18 is the shredded document. I have a photocopy of all of the documents in sequence, not just the front, and I believe that the entire document, which again is going to be, they've already waived any objection or opened the door by entering in the actual document. I'm simply showing what are the pages behind that first page. I don't believe in its current state the jury could open up the shredded document and look at it. Those are the only other ones that I anticipate that the state might object to.
I'll start at the end and work forward.
Okay.
Do you have copies of the photographs that you intend to introduce through Kim Van Wass?
This is why I told you guys to get together about this yesterday.
tell you what, we're going to take like a 10-minute recess. I'm going to let both sides talk, and then we'll talk about the issues that you may or may not have. If they're stipulated to, or there's not going to be an objection, of course, we don't need to address it. And if so, we might as well do it now while we have the jury out.
Very well, Your Honor.
So you can either step down.
Okay, a few things to note here. We just heard that Curtis Wright Jr. is going to be called back to the stand today. We anticipated that, but now we heard it for real, and that's going to be something to watch. Now, Jessica, this issue of the video being hearsay, and hearsay, again, is an out-of-court statement that is used to basically prove the truth of the matter asserted. It's generally impermissible to have something out of court in order to prove something, but there are exceptions to it, and there's things that may look like hearsay but are not actually hearsay. Where does this fall? I'm not sure I understand.
No, this is a very interesting one too, but I think that if they don't allow this video in, it might be an appealable issue, especially if she is there are some contradicting statements, right? If she's saying that she threw the overalls over a lake and now she found them or they were found not by water. I think what they are trying to prove is that she found them. She really didn't throw them out. So I think that, there's contradictory issues here, so they might have to show the video. I tend to agree with the defense in this side, but we'll see. I mean, we'll see what the judge decides.
Where do you think, Nina, the judge is going to go here? Do you think it really helps the defense's case that much, trying to show maybe Taylor Showmaker is saying one thing and then saying another?
Yes, I would agree that the defense raises an issue of credibility, which is an issue of utmost importance in a trial where witnesses are producing testimony, and I think based on those grounds, the judge should allow the evidence.
Okay, well, they took a short break. We're going to wait to jump back live. Let's take a break on our end. When we come back, a lot more.
What happens inside courtrooms? You won't believe it until you see it for yourself. Take a front row seat inside real courtrooms and hear firsthand from those who are there.
Grant me 5 minutes in a locked room with this demon.
I'm Dan Abrams, and this is Court Cam.
Court Cam. New series premieres Thursday, December 5th at 9 on A&E.
Welcome back, everybody. We're waiting to jump live back again into the Mark Sievers trial. They've taken a short break. The defense is going to continue on with their case. And what we just learned before our last break is that they are going to call today Curtis Wright Jr. back to the stand. That is going to be interesting to see where they go with that. As we wait to jump live, we're going to go back to some testimony you might have missed. Kimberly Torres. Now, she is the Sievers neighbor, and she overheard an argument between Mark Sievers and Teresa Sievers. Well, that's according to her. Take a look.
Were you able to overhear what they were saying?
Teresa had said that she was.
Well, the question was, were you able to overhear what they were saying? And prior to them going inside, was the argument continuous then, or did it stop and start, stop and start?
That was the only thing that I had overheard, was just for a few minutes. I tried not to pay too much attention. Actually, I was kind of embarrassed because I had family over for dinner, and that's not what I.
Right, but the question that let me ask you the question.
Yes.
You said you overheard them arguing.
Yes, I did.
And you were on your lanai.
Yes.
Was that argument continuous before they went inside, or did it stop and start, and then they went inside?
It was continuous, and then right after that, we went inside and had dinner.
Okay.
So
the part of the argument that you overheard, you said was continuous.
Mm-hmm.
Were you able to hear Mr. Sievers' voice?
Yes.
And was that the same voice you'd heard before when you talked to him?
Yes.
Were you able to hear Dr. Sievers' voice?
Yes.
Was that the same voice that you had heard when you talked to her?
Yes.
And how would you describe the argument? Was it a loud argument, or was it a quiet argument?
It was a loud argument.
And during that argument, did you hear Dr. Sievers say anything to Mr. Sievers?
Yes.
Did you hear Dr. Sievers say anything to Mr. Sievers?
Yes.
What did she say?
There was some profanity, but she says, I'm tired of this crap. I'm leaving.
Did she use the word crap or some other word?
Yes. She used another word.
Okay. Was it a bad word? Okay. So she said she's tired of this, and she used a bad word.
I'm effing tired of this. So.
Okay. And she said she's leaving.
Yes.
And did you hear Mark Sievers' voice respond to that?
Yeah, his wasn't as loud. She was more loud. He says, if that's what you want to do, fine. But we'll see about that.
So you went inside?
Yes.
And how long before Dr. Sievers was killed did you hear this argument?
Maybe a month and a half.
So if she was killed on June 28th, you may have heard this in the middle.
Sustained.
Okay. Do you know when Dr. Sievers was found at her home?
Excuse me, do I know?
Do you know when Dr. Sievers was found dead at her home?
Yes.
And do you recall that date?
Yes, I do.
What was the date?
It was Monday, June the 28th.
Okay, and so if this was a month and a half before she was found, what month would this have been in?
It would have been in April.
June 28th?
May or yeah, like May.
Okay. So a month and a half might be the middle of May?
Yeah.
Okay, Jessica, here's the thing. That doesn't look great for Mark Sievers, but under cross-examination, she admitted on the day of the murder, she didn't tell detectives about this fight. What do you think about that?
Again, I don't think that it's a terrible thing that she didn't tell the detectives because, she hadn't really thought about it yet. But once she did tell the detectives. And again, it just goes to show, and obviously, is that Miss Dr. Severs was the lifeline. She was the working woman, and she wanted to leave him. And what is he going to do if they get divorced? He's not going to have any money. So again, you have to infer that he did want to kill her because now she's worth more money. More money if she would have left him, then he would be out in the cold by himself.
Let me ask you this, Nina. She seemed to be a bad witness for the defense because she thought I mentioned it earlier, they observed Mark Severs on the pavement, hitting his hands and knees. One witness called it bad acting. She said the very first thing that went through my mind was that he killed his wife and kids. She also said, Kimberly Torres, that after the murder, she thought that he might be stalking her or looking around her property, and then she said, who knows, if he was crazy enough to do that to his wife, he could come over here and kill me. How does the defense fight against that kind of witness?
I think it's a difficult position that they're in because, again, she speaks to the fact that he had some motive. She overheard them arguing. She corroborates the fact that Teresa wanted to leave him. I think that it's a difficult hurdle for them to overcome, and they have to ultimately try and shoot down her credibility, perhaps, and show that what she's saying is not true.
And that, again, isn't that why he should take the stand, or he needs to take the stand, Jessica, in order to give his side of the story, give his perspective, show a demeanor, maybe paint himself in a different light? He shaved his goatee, maybe in an effort to look a little different than Curtis Wright Jr. He's dressed up in proper professional attire. Doesn't he need to get on the stand?
I don't know. I think it's going to be difficult. If he gets on the stand, we don't know what the prosecution is going to ask him. We don't know what he's going to answer. Again, I'm thinking with the defense, what his attorneys are thinking. And how is he going to then explain the motive for Wright? We still don't know what motive, unless he has something very explosive that we don't know about, that's something that happened between Wright and his wife. But if he doesn't have that, what would be the point? Just to show that he's a nice guy? I don't believe so, and I think it's going to be very difficult. And I don't know how you then, with this witness, how the defense is going to be able to tear down her credibility. They can't ask her about her feelings again because it's only going to hurt them again.
That's why today is really important to see how they question Curtis Wright Jr. Maybe then we'll hear this different narrative about why he may have done this on his own. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber. I'm here with Jessica Ramirez. I'm here with Nina Ovrutsky. We're breaking down some big legal topics that are happening, so let's get started right now. First up, want to let you know that there is a pretrial hearing scheduled today for Robert Durst, the infamous real estate heir who's going on trial for the murder of his friend Susan Berman. It's alleged that Durst killed Berman to keep her quiet about his alleged involvement in the murder of his wife Kathy back in 1982. Now, Durst is a name that should sound pretty familiar, as he became the subject of the HBO documentary The Jinx, in which he arguably confessed to his crimes over a hot mic in the show's finale. That itself has become a subject of legal controversy. We're not sure what issues are going to be decided today or what's going to be discussed today, but what we do know is we are not permitted to be live there. What we can do and what we're planning on doing is having footage from the hearing later on in the day, and we're going to update you this afternoon nonetheless. Now, next up at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we're going to be live with opening statements in the Arizona trial of Ramon Bueno. Bueno is charged with attempted murder and various other counts in connection with the 2014 shooting of Trooper James Casey. The state alleges that Casey pulled over Bueno and other individuals because their car that they were driving had heavily tinted windows. That's a crime in Arizona. During the stop, it's alleged the defendant, who was seated in the back seat, took out a .357 caliber revolver and shot Trooper Casey in the face. The miracle of this story? Casey survived and returned to active duty the following year. Now, this may sound familiar to many of you out there because Casey and his department were featured on A&E's Live PD, hosted by our very own Dan Abrams. Now, Casey is planning on testifying in this trial, and that will no doubt be an incredible moment to watch. Right now, we're planning on jumping live any second into day 8 of the Mark Sievers trial. He's the man accused of plotting the heinous murder of his wife, Dr. Teresa Sievers. It's alleged that he hired his friend Curtis Wright Jr. to do the actual killing, but then he recruited a man named Jimmy Ray Rogers. In a trial that we covered here on the network, Rogers was convicted of second-degree murder. Wright took a plea deal for potentially 25 years in prison for second-degree murder in exchange for testifying against Rogers and Sievers. The state called Wright their star witness earlier on in the trial, and he testified about his friendship with the defendant, how they plotted to carry out the hit, and how he and Rogers brutally bludgeoned Sievers to death with hammers. Now, what we saw this morning was the beginning of the defense's case. And what we learned earlier on is that they are going to call back Wright Jr. to the stand. Now, as we wait to jump live, let's go back to when this man took the stand for the prosecution and gave his story about what happened.
And what was the agreement for the work?
$100 a month.
Was there ever like a contract or anything written?
Not a written contract, no.
Old school gentleman's agreement?
I did it because he asked me to.
And did Mr. Sievers pay you the $100 per month as you agreed?
Yes.
Did you get paid every month or in increments?
No, it was kind of sporadic, so it was whenever it was a good time for them to pay. If money was tight, I'd wait, and sometimes they paid me early, so.
When you say money was tight, was your money situation tight?
Yeah, once I became disabled, I had limited income. I meant their money.
So at some point prior to your wedding, did Mr. Sievers ask to speak with you?
You said prior to, right?
Prior to getting married.
Yes.
Did Mr. Sievers ask to speak with you?
Yes.
And how did he ask to speak with you?
The night before he came to Missouri, he sent me a text message telling me that he had something personal that he needed to talk to me about. He didn't say what it was, but
okay.
He said that he'd hoped that we'd have some time to be able to talk privately.
So you're getting married and Mr. Sievers wanted to talk to you about himself?
Yes.
And so you said earlier that he had arrived at some point, either the night before or 2 nights before the celebration at your home. Did he ever tell you why he wanted to speak with you?
Not until the night before the wedding, or the day before the wedding, when he came to the house with everybody else.
And was this by text message as well? Or in person?
Well, when he came to the house, we talked in person, so there wasn't anything else said about it until he came to the house.
All right, so, and when he came to the house, and this is, again, the night before the wedding when you were having the festivities at your house,
Yes,
Mr. Severs indicated that he wanted to talk to you about something.
yes,
Did you actually get a chance to talk to him?
yes.
And tell us how that conversation happened.
At some point during the afternoon, he asked me if we could go somewhere and talk privately. So we went to my bedroom, closed the door where that could happen.
He testified as a state witness. Now the defense wants to bring him back out for more questioning. Jessica, do you think he came off as a credible witness in the eyes of the jury?
Well, I believe so because they convicted Rogers.
They didn't, but they convicted Rogers on second degree, not first degree. It wasn't the total win they wanted.
That is correct, and I think it's because he's a hard witness to believe. I mean, this guy is a murderer. He was there. It was his idea. It was his friend. He spent time with this woman, so it is very difficult to. And I think the jury, once they start weighing all these factors, they kind of, it is hard for them to take and to believe that this man is so horrific, and now we have to believe him. And again, he got a great deal, right? He also pled, so he has to testify. So again, all those factors come into play, and I think that, just like you said, the jury looked at it, and it was second degree.
Talking about the deal, Nina, this idea that he has to provide substantial assistance to the state in exchange for a more lenient sentence, he might have been in the clear after testifying in Rogers and now testifying here, but the defense is calling him again. The defense is going to call him as their own witness. Can he say something that might trip him up? Can he say something really bad where his deal is in jeopardy?
Well, I think ultimately he has to provide substantial evidence. And yes, the prosecution wants that evidence to corroborate their story and the picture that they are trying to paint. But ultimately, they do not have control over the testimony that he provides when the defense questions him when they present their case.
You better not contradict what he just said, because this is he's trying to help the prosecution's case, right? I mean, that's the idea of it. Or look, he's supposed to testify truthfully, and the prosecution is going to use that to build their case. Let's play a little bit more of his testimony from earlier on in the trial.
All right, so when you're in your bedroom, what did you, Mr. Severs, well, let me ask you this. Did he tell you what it was he texted you about, wanting to talk to you about?
Yes.
What did he tell you?
He told me that he and Teresa were having problems, marital problems. He told me that she was having an affair, and that they were having financial problems as well, considering bankruptcy.
Did you believe Mr. Severs when he was telling you these things?
Yes.
Did you have any proof that she was having an affair or that they were having any financial problems or anything like that?
No.
You took his word for it?
Yes.
What else did he tell you?
Well, we talked a little bit about, just different options. It was a short conversation because we got interrupted. At one point he said a hypothetical situation where if kids were going to be taken away and put into some kind of danger, that if I knew somebody that would be willing to help him.
Help him how?
We didn't get into the specifics, but my take on it at the time was maybe to have this guy run off, beat up, something.
So did you ever actually make a decision about whether or not he was going to get the help from you that he was asking for?
Yes, I did.
When did you make that decision?
It was a couple of weeks after the wedding before I actually made the made the commitment. I didn't get a phone, a second phone, right away. Some of the communication between us was asking if I had my phone yet. I delayed doing that because I wasn't sure what my involvement or if any would be.
Now, you told us, and I'm going to step back for a minute, because you told us earlier at the beginning of your testimony that you and Jimmy Rogers came down and did this. So how did Jimmy Rogers, if you and Mark Sievers are having these discussions about the death of his wife, how did Jimmy Rogers get involved?
Jimmy, and a little bit of background, Jimmy has let me know in the past that Jimmy has let me know in the past that his past criminal activity, that he's been involved in things like this. So, so the only person that I know that might have wanted to be involved in this would have been Jimmy. So that's why the 2-week period was significant, because I got my cell phone, my other phone, the anonymous call phone, the anonymous phone. We referred to them as our other phones, just so that you kind of keep it straight. I got my other phone on May 17th, and I got it right after I spoke to Jimmy. I went and talked to Jimmy in person and told him that, there was a job, not specifics about who or anything, but made sure that it was something he wanted to get involved in. He was on board. So
Jimmy Rogers is a contract killer?
I don't know that I would call him that, but I know that he's been involved in other deaths. So
You thought he was some kind of tough guy?
Well, I believe that he was somebody that would actually do it. So
What does that mean, he's been involved in other deaths? The prosecution wants him to be credible throughout all points of his testimony because he's their star witness. Is there anything about his tale that just strikes you as a little odd?
Well, I think...
Well, let me rephrase. All of it's very odd, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all of it is very odd. And again, he has reason to lie, right? I mean, he did plea first. He's getting 25 years. His wife, all of a sudden, is not getting, was not charged. So I'm sure that had something to do with it.
Well, he's questioned about that. And it was made very clear that she wasn't offered a deal. There were no promises that they wouldn't go after his wife. And so they tried to make that point very clear, even though the defense brought it up.
And I'm sure that was a promise that was made to him, so he could testify. So there's inferences that you can take when you're having a conversation with the prosecution or with the investigators. So, I mean, and it's very difficult to believe this man because he is a murderer. He did take part, and I think that's the reasonable doubt that played in the jury's brains when they convicted Mr. Rogers on second degree.
Nina, is there something that bothers you by the fact that here's a guy who will most likely get 25 years in prison, and yet, based upon the decision from the jury in the Jimmy Ray Rogers trial, where they found Jimmy Ray Rogers guilty of second-degree murder but not first-degree murder, you could argue that they didn't believe his story that Jimmy Ray Rogers took a more direct role in the killing of Teresa Sievers, which means that if he really didn't bludgeon her to death, it was really Curtis Wright Jr. who was the main force, the main person who took that hammer and bludgeoned her to death. So the idea here that this guy might walk away in 25 years for being the real person who ultimately killed Teresa Sievers, what does it say about the justice system?
I think it goes to show that they're trying to work the justice system in that, okay, he's going to help us present our case and he's going to help us bring justice ultimately that Dr. Sievers deserves. But again, we don't know if we can believe him. We don't know what testimony he's going to present when he's examined by the defense side. So justice might really not be served here.
And that's why the prosecution is going so hard after Mark Sievers, because he is the alleged ringleader. He's the person that put this all together, and the prosecution wants this jury to find him guilty of first-degree murder in a principal theory. He didn't have to be there, he didn't have to be at the crime scene, but because he directed it and put it in motion, he can be found guilty of first-degree murder nonetheless. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll have more.
We all love video doorbells. Voice assistants have changed our lives. We now control our home with a touch. Indoor and outdoor cameras help us keep watch. We want to guard our digital lives and hold tight to our loved ones everywhere.
It's the ADT Black Friday sale. Get an outdoor camera and an HD video doorbell installed free, plus a $100 prepaid Visa card. Don't wait. Call 1-800-ADT-ASAP.
Okay, so the judge and the attorneys are back in the Mark Sievers courtroom. The jury is not. A witness just took the stand. This is probably some questioning of this witness before the jury is present. Let's go live and hear where the defense is going with their next witness.
Take my copy and put it in a binder clip. That's how I know it's my copy. Just print another copy. Just print another. He'll print another copy and you
Just
can
there are
use
only
this
2
copy.
copies.
There you go.
This is going to be defense 5. Approach.
Yes, sir.
Mark as defense exhibit 5. Do you recognize this?
Can I have a second to flip through?
Yep.
Okay, so this is what, more procedural, what's happening here, Jessica? The idea of that they, remember the defense is calling some witnesses just to get exhibits in that they couldn't have gotten in during the state's case. How does that work?
So it's definitely a procedural issue, and because they weren't able to bring it in because you're only limited to, when you're crossing, you're only limited to the direct, so this is another way that they are able to bring it in, and this is just what they have to do.
Now, Nina, let me ask you the big question here. We're waiting for the testimony of Curtis Wright Jr. We believe that's going to happen today, that the state is, the defense is going to recall or call him back as their own witness. The idea of questioning him about something new, something that they couldn't have questioned him about maybe under cross-examination, where can we go with that? I'm reminded of when he took the stand and there was a line of questioning about a detective asking Wright Jr. if he had a sexual relationship with Mark Sievers. There was an objection in the courtroom. That was sustained. That line of questioning ended. Can that line of questioning now continue again if he is the defense's witness?
I believe that they should certainly try. I think that is the route that they need to go down in terms of establishing his motive, would be whether he had a relationship with Mr. Sievers, Dr. Sievers. There has to be some sort of connection there to ultimately have Mark Sievers not convicted of this crime.
We need an explanation for why Wright Jr. would have done this on his own. Let's go back live and we'll hear more from this witness on the stand.
Pay for DNA to be tested from DNA Labs International. So this is not a free service like FDLE is.
Okay. And to your knowledge, does DNA Labs use the same process to analyze their your submissions as FDLE?
Objection is outside scope of this witness's knowledge as to DNA Labs processes.
If she knows, she can answer.
I don't know. You would have to ask the analyst. I'm not sure what their procedures are.
Okay. And how many times have you made submissions to DNA Labs?
Overall?
Yes.
In my career?
Yes.
A lot.
Okay, many. And the document that I gave to you, is that a clear or fair and accurate copy of the documents you received from DNA Labs?
Yes, they are. There are photocopies of the 4 reports sent back to us from DNA Labs International.
Okay. And when you get those documents back, do you depend on them?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you depend on them? Do you
I guess
believe? I mean, do you believe that they're accurate?
Objection is to relevancy as to her belief as to their accuracy.
Overruled.
I would assume that they're accurate. I go through them and I read them and I look to see what type of results we have, and then that bases our next decision on what we send.
Okay. And are you familiar in the way in which your submissions are processed?
Again, I don't understand the question.
Just in a general sense, if you send something off to serology, are you familiar with the type of tests that are going to be performed on your submissions?
Are you talking about YSTR, STR, minifiler, that kind of thing?
Yes.
I am aware of different tests that they do, but I'm not aware of what they did on every item.
Okay. To your knowledge, do they have a uniform process by which they process your submissions?
You would have to ask the analyst their procedures.
Okay. You said you've sent submissions off to DNA Labs many times.
Yes, I have.
Do you have any reason to believe that their procedures or the results are in any way inaccurate?
I would not assume that they're inaccurate.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to move what's been previously marked as Exhibit number 5 for defense and as Exhibit number 5.
There is not a foundation to admit the reports or results from DNA Lab International. We don't know what particular tests were used. There are lots of numbers attached to this, numbers that are outside the scope of understanding of this witness. It's not admissible through this witness.
Your Honor, the test is trustworthiness, and Ms. Van Was has testified that she has made these submissions many, many times. And Your Honor, there's no reason to believe that over the course of however many submissions that she has made, that these results this time would in any way be untrustworthy.
The objection sustained. Anything else?
There you are.
You can step down for now, ma'am.
You can give that to the clerk. You'll want that made a part of the record?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. You can bring the jury back in with the detective back on the stand, and are you still calling Ms. Van Was or no?
Yes, I
Okay.
still have additional exhibits and questions for Ms. Van Was.
So we can go through her and then probably break for lunch. Unless it's really quick. Okay.
Jessica, I'm a bit confused. Why is the defense focusing on anything to do with DNA? Mark Sievers, their client, was not at the crime scene. We're not looking at DNA evidence with him as much as it ties Rogers and it ties Curtis Wright Jr. They're not disputing the fact, right? They're not disputing the fact that Wright Jr. and Rogers did this. They're just cutting the tie between them and Sievers. Why are they focusing so much on this?
No, the only thing that I can think of is just protecting the record, right? The defense has to do their job, and they have to also go against every element of the prosecution's case, and DNA is one of the elements. Whether it ties their client or not, it is an element, and they have to protect the record for an appeal later on. That's really the only thing that I can think of why they would be bringing this witness, and why does it matter whether the submissions were done properly, or whether they could be reliable, or whether there was a chain of command that was properly followed when the DNA was taken.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I just think maybe it's to protect the record.
Well, again, she testified under direct about collecting this trace evidence from the crime scene in the car. Could it be also, and you tell me if this is a common defense tactic, that even if it doesn't really relate to their client, the more you attack a prosecution's case, the more you attack an investigation from any standpoint, saying something was sloppy, something was inaccurate, they assumed too much, that you could tie it back to your client and said, look what they did on X, Y, and Z. Look how sloppy they were. Look how everything, their analysis and their conclusions are wrong. So if they're wrong about this, couldn't they be wrong about my client? Couldn't they be wrong about the burner phones and the conversations? Is that another tactic?
Absolutely. It's a strategic maneuver. I think that there are certain points that the defense wants to focus on in proving and disproving the prosecution's case. However, they need to address absolutely everything. As Jessica said, they need to preserve the record, and they need to make sure all elements are addressed that the prosecution raised.
Well, it appears that's what they're going to be doing. They're going to take a quick break. Yeah, they're going to come back in a minute. Let's take a break on our end. When we come back, we'll be live. Stay tuned. All right, we're back live right now in the Mark Sievers trial. The defense is continuing on with their case. They've called back Kimberly Van Was, a crime scene technician who testified for the state. She actually collected trace evidence from the crime scene and a car. But really what's happening right now is that, if you'll recall, the prosecution presented evidence that there was a shredded life insurance policy in Mark Sievers' office at the time of when Teresa died. And that is important because when we establish, well, is there a motive for why he would have killed his wife, questions of life insurance come up. So this idea of, well, what was collected and how is being explored by the defense. Let's go back.
Yes, I do.
Okay. And is this the kind of what we got to see from the original?
Through the clear plastic bag?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm just gonna move this up. See the stamp right here?
Yes.
Does that indicate that this is the very next page?
You'd have to go back to the other one.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. And how do you increase the magnification?
Oh, let me show you.
Okay. Did you see this document, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay. This document purports to be a document from the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, is that correct?
Yes.
And the insured purports to be Teresa A. Sievers, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And can you read where it says, "Dear Teresa A. Sievers"?
Dear Teresa A. Sievers, you made a great decision to protect your income with disability insurance from MetLife. As part of your policy, you choose the guaranteed insurability option, which gives you the right to increase your monthly benefit amount without medical underwriting. This could help ensure that your coverage keeps up with your income as it grows over the years.
Okay. So would you agree with me that policy 6482101 is disability insurance?
That's what it says in the document.
Okay, do you have any reason to believe otherwise?
I'm not very familiar with insurance documents, but that's what it says.
Okay, and the rest of this document, does it appear that anything on this page has been filled out for submission?
You only have a portion of the page shown. No, it does not appear that it was filled out.
Okay. And same thing. Does it appear that any part of this page has been filled out for submission?
Does not appear to be.
And where it says agreements, if we look down, where it says signature of proposed insured, do we see a signature?
No.
And do we see any producer information?
No, it's blank.
And then in what we call the disclosures section, has there been any signature of anyone purporting to understand any of the disclosures made by the insurance company?
There's no signature on this page.
And would you agree with me that this page is purely informational?
Yes.
And this page does it appear to have been filled out for submission?
No.
Okay.
All right, how impactful is the shredded life insurance document? Obviously, she helped present that evidence for the prosecution during their case. Couldn't you look at it two different ways why it's shredded? What do you think?
Well, I think that it is impactful because it wasn't a life insurance policy. It looks like a disability policy. So again, they're trying to show, hey, listen, it wasn't even filled out. So
the defense is trying to show that.
It wasn't filled out. It wasn't a life insurance policy. It was a disability policy. So they have it wrong again. To me, it really doesn't matter that it was a disability policy. We know she had an insurance policy. That's a fact. So whether that's shredded, a disability policy doesn't really make or break what I think. But I think it goes back to your point earlier is, look what the state is doing. They're getting everything wrong. So why should we trust anything that they're saying and anything that it relates to this case?
That's the defense's argument. Nina, what do you think about the insurance policy, considering there was also, at the time they collected this evidence, they also found the receipts from the Walmart where the prepaid burner phones were bought. So maybe if they found a shredded up life insurance policy 6 months before this, it wouldn't have been a big deal, but the timing of it doesn't look great.
Right. I think that the timing of it does not help the defense because the burner phones are certainly questionable. You don't necessarily carry a burner phone with you on a daily basis. But I do agree that, the shredding of the life insurance policy, they're trying to play on that. They're trying to show that, hey, this wasn't important like the state is making it seem, and it's really not relevant here.
Yeah, it's one part in their defense strategy. Let's just jump back and hear where they're going to go next.
Can you see okay?
Yes.
Okay. Can you describe what we see in this photograph?
Can you turn it one angle counterclockwise?
Okay. I'm going to zoom it all the way out there. Good.
It was just a better angle.
Okay. Can you describe what we see in this photograph?
This is a photograph I took standing in the doorway from the laundry room into the kitchen, and it's showing a dog dish, a water container, and a hammer.
Oh, and Ms. Benoit, do we see how the dog dish is oriented?
Crooked?
Okay. And is this a door frame right here?
Yes.
Would you agree with me that that dog bowl or dish is protruding into the door frame?
I would say that it's within the door frame.
Okay. And this door frame, is this the threshold between the kitchen and the laundry room?
Yes.
All right. Can you tell me what you see in this photo?
This is a photograph of the laundry room. I'm standing in the just inside the doorway from the garage. So I'm standing in the laundry room slightly, and it's a picture of the floor going into the kitchen.
Okay. And these black machines here. You can't see them really well, but given this little circular drum right here, what are those?
It's the washer and dryer that's on the left side of the wall.
Okay. And we can clearly see one dog dish right here, is that correct?
It's one dog dish within the little double dog dish carrier.
Okay. And then we have the dog dish that we just looked at that is in between the door threshold.
Correct.
What do we see in this photograph?
This is a photograph I took of the front of the refrigerator.
Okay. And what is this yellow thing right here?
It's a yardstick. It's used to just place in photographs so you can see how high things are. In this case, I was showing the height of bloodstains.
And you put the yardstick there. It wasn't there when you walked in the house.
Correct.
Okay. And we can see various blood stains and blood spatter here. Is that correct?
Yes.
How high up did the blood spatter go?
I noted that the bloodstains were under 36 inches.
Okay. So under 36 inches, that would typically be below someone's waist. Is that correct?
Depends on how tall you are.
Okay. Do you know, and again, I know the picture's a little blurry, can you tell any direction from the blood spatter?
Direction of?
As far as where the fluid, where the blood was moving?
Yes.
Okay. Can you kind of tell me where is the blood moving?
On the right side of the refrigerator, those stains are more circular. So, no, on the right side.
Okay.
Sorry, looking at the photo.
Okay.
These stains are more circular, so those are going pretty straight on towards the refrigerator. On the left side of the refrigerator, you cannot see it in this photograph very well. There are some linear patterns that are going from right to left.
You first went to the Sievers residence on July 29th, is that correct?
June 29th.
I'm sorry, June 29th. And on June 29th, did you take various swabs from toilet?
All right, so we just heard more about the dog bowl. Do you think this is the kind of the idea of, hey, let's show a little bit, you know what, I'll tell you what, we have to hit a break. When we come back, we're gonna talk about the significance of the dog bowl in a second. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.
What happens inside courtrooms? You won't believe it until you see it for yourself. Take a front row seat inside real courtrooms and hear firsthand from those who are there.
Grant me 5 minutes in a locked room with those demons.
I'm Dan Abrams, and this is Court Cam.
Court Cam. New series premieres Thursday, December 5th at 9 on A&E.
Welcome back, everybody. We're live in the Mark Sievers trial. The defense has begun their case earlier today. They're continuing on. They've called back this witness who was for the state and going over different items of evidence that were collected. Let's jump live, and we're going to maybe understand where the defense is going with this.
From the handle of the hammer by Marker 1 and the standard from Teresa Sievers.
They were sent on July 2nd.
Okay. And when we say standard from Teresa Sievers, what does that mean?
In this case, it was a DNA stain card that was collected during the autopsy of Dr. Sievers.
Okay. All total, how many hammers were collected for testing from the Sievers household?
2 hammers.
Okay. One was the red and black hammer. Is that correct?
From the kitchen, yes.
Okay. And what was the other hammer?
There was a hammer found underneath the Mercedes vehicle in the garage.
Okay. Did you do any presumptive tests on that hammer?
Yes.
What presumptive tests did you do on that hammer?
I processed it for fingerprints. I swabbed it for a presumptive test with phenolphthalein.
Well, let me stop you there. What's phenolphthalein?
Phenolphthalein is a presumptive test for blood. It's a 3-step process of chemicals that are placed on a swab after swabbing the item, and a pink indication says it's a presumptive positive for blood.
Was there any pink presumptive positive for blood on that hammer?
No.
Okay. What other tests did you do?
I also swabbed it for DNA.
Okay. And when you swabbed it for DNA, I understand you don't do the DNA testing yourself. Is that correct?
Correct.
So would you have submitted that to whom?
The item would have been sent to DNA Labs International with other items sent to that lab.
Okay. The last time we were speaking, we spoke a little bit about some splash patterns in the sink. You said you noticed some splash patterns in the sink. Do you recall that?
They were on the floor.
On the floor. Did you ever collect and package those splash patterns for analysis?
I swabbed the area, and I collected that, and I packaged that.
And where did you send it?
That item was not sent out for testing.
Okay.
Okay, my understanding of what this is about, and you correct me if I'm wrong, they're doing all this in anticipation of Curtis Wainwright testifying, right? Calling him again. Are they trying to show that his story doesn't make sense? The idea that he tripped over the bowl, that him and Rogers take these hammers and beat Teresa Sievers. Now again, he put all the blame on Jimmy Ray Rogers and said that he was the one who went crazy and really bludgeoned her to death. Are they trying to show that his story doesn't make sense and trying to impeach his credibility?
I think that's definitely a possibility. I mean, he is a star witness, so you want to impeach him right away. But I think also, it's very tough. There's all this overwhelming evidence of the crime scene that a lawyer just cannot ignore. And I think that he could take the stand and say, I'm not even going to defend my client in regards to the crime scene because he wasn't there. I guess you could take that stand, but then again, you have to preserve the record.
But I mean, Nina, why else would they be doing this? Why are they questioning about this line of evidence?
It's hard to tell any other reason besides impeaching Curtis's credibility. Again, Mark Sievers wasn't there, so they want to focus on who was there and really bring in the point that this is the individual that is guilty, not my client, and also bring his credibility into question.
Jessica, I'll give you the final word. We have about 30 seconds. Do you think the jury's confused at this point?
I don't think that they're confused. Again, I think that the defense is trying to do their best. I think that if they didn't attack every single evidence, every single element, it would be an ineffective assistance of counsel claim.
Right.
That's what I would be scared about. So I would have to, I would have to attack the evidence that was presented, every element.
And the question is, will that man that you see right there, Mark Sievers, take the stand? He's the defendant. We're going to wait and see. Jessica, Nina, thank you so much both for coming on and breaking it down with me. I am signing off. Angelica Spanos is signing in. Stay tuned. We have a lot more for you here on Law and Crime.